Hello and welcome to Subversive Radio. I'm your host, Keith Giles, and I can't believe it. I finally made it into my own show. My 4 very gracious guests have been here for about about a minute and a half, or at least waiting for me to get on here, so I appreciate you guys and your patience. We are going to do our first Subversive Radio Roundtable discussion. So I am going to be joined this evening by 4 different guests. And we've got a variety of topics. I'm sure in the time allotted we won't get to everything, but we can at least, tackle at least some of the topics and get as far as we get. And really the goal here is just to have a conversation that's, interesting, stimulating, and thought-provoking, and I'm sure with my guests that won't be a problem. So I'm joined tonight by Neil Cole. He's the author of Primal Fire and also Organic Church. Jon Zens is the author of A Church Every Half Mile and 58 to Nothing, which is a study of the one another's in the Scripture. My friend Kent Williamson, who's the director of the documentary Rebellion of Thought and the soon-to-be-released documentary Stained Glass Windows. And finally, my guest, Herb Montgomery, who's the founder of Renewed Heart Ministries and the book Finding the Father. And Herb, Kent, Jon, Neil, welcome finally at last to Subversive Radio.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Right. Thank you guys for doing this. Ken, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
All right, you're just playing softly. I hear you.
I'm sorry?
All right. So, hey, let's get started. What I want to do is I'll just ask some questions, and if I can, get brief answers from each of you, and then after I hear from each of you, if there's any need for, if any of you guys want to chime in on something or elaborate on something, we can do that just to make sure we don't trample over each other, all right?
Sounds good.
Good. All right. So I think the one thing that the 4 of you guys, and I guess I should say the 5 of us, have in common is the idea of we all in one way or another participate in house church or organic church or simple church or New Testament church, etc. And some of us have different names for what we do. But let's just start with that as a kind of the common ground topic. And if I could, let's start with this question. What is the one thing that most people get wrong about house church, or what you find is the greatest misconception about house church? And Jon Zens, can I have you start off?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I would say the biggest misconception I've seen would probably be the idea that, there's something sacred about meeting in a living room, and that's going to solve all your issues. And as we all know, you can have a traditional church in a living room. You can have a controlling leader in a living room. So in other words, none of the problems that are in the institutional church are guaranteed to be alleviated by meeting in a living room. So I think to me that's one of the biggest misconceptions I've seen.
Right. I would agree with that. I think also if you need any proof of that, you just turn to 1 Corinthians and you can find evidence of that. So I agree. Neil, what would you say?
Well, my first impulse is to just agree with Jon. I do that with most everything. So what he said. I actually think we've inherited this idea of church that's really more Roman Catholic and Constantinian, and as a result, when we put it in a house, we really haven't changed anything. Unless we get to the core of seeing church as a spiritual family on mission together, we won't have much help. And honestly, if I have to be part of a dysfunctional church, I'd rather be part of a dysfunctional megachurch where I can hide than in a circle with a dysfunctional group of people that I have to see face to face all the time. So I really don't think putting in a living room makes it healthy. We have to deal with something more core than just simply where we meet or what size group we have.
Right. Yeah. So in other words, it's more important what happens when we meet than where we meet.
Yeah. And who we are.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. Herb, how would you respond to that? Or how would you answer that question?
Well, what we find, this is a great question because I just got back from Hawaii where I was visiting a little house church over there. And one of the things that was brought up again while I was visiting was we are still very much saturated in a consumer culture. And for a lot of people that I'm the younger generation that I bump into, their move away from institutional church to more of a organic church or an open, mutual, participatory setting is still with the mindset that this is going to somehow satisfy every one of my spiritual needs for community, and it's just going to be this utopian. And the challenge is it forces you into learning how to practice the one another's in front of people right across the room from you. I had a lady that called up one day and said, I hate this idea. I hate doing open mutual sharing. And I said, well, that's great. Why? She said, I've been able to go to church for the last 30 years and never have to learn how to love the person sitting next to me. And so it may not. I think the biggest misconception is I'm going to get into, as has been said so many times already, a living room setting, and even if it's open, mutual, participatory, I'm going to get into this group, and somehow it's just going to be perfect. And the transition isn't smooth for people. There's a huge learning curve in the whole process. It's much easier for them to come and sit in the pew.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Herb, and I think most people, that is a great misconception. I think people believe very hopefully that, I really don't like what's going on in my traditional church. I really can't wait to get into a open, participatory, kind of organic church setting, because when I do, the perception is it's going to just solve everything. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be Shangri-La. And then
but sometimes it gets worse before it gets better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a lot harder to hide, and it's the cost is a lot higher for somebody. Like in your example, it costs a whole lot more to participate and talk and share and love and care for people.
People love the idea of participating. They hate the idea of listening to someone else as they participate.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and Kent, how would you respond to the question?
Well, I think there's a lot of misperceptions about the whole process of home church, but a lot of people think, oh, you're going to start a church, like they're thinking we're gathering so that we can eventually go and build a building and get pews and carpet the place and put a parking lot in, and and obviously that's not our intention at all. And so one of the things that we try to do is just to communicate to people that really what we're talking about is just journeying through life together and being there for one another. One of the examples that I like to give when we first left the institutional structured church, there was a family that joined us, and the wife, her husband was out of town. There was a situation at home. This is before she had left the institutional church. There was a situation took place where there was an injury to one of her sons. She's in a very large church, 800 members. She didn't know who to call. She didn't know, who should I call? I need some help. I got to get, I'm struggling with this situation. And she didn't know who to. And the relationship, the depth of the relationship was very shallow that she had. And we had experienced a similar thing, and we found that when we traded that in, those very shallow relationships, and traded it in for very deep relationships with a much fewer number of people, that's when we really began journeying through life together. And so that was kind of that to me is a good thing that we try to communicate with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very true. That's beautiful. That's beautiful just to see that in action, loving each other and caring for people.
Yeah, and praying with one another and encouraging one another and spurring one another along, and in very tangible ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, so that's great. And just even hearing the answers that you guys provided just to that first question, it kind of spins out a couple of other things I wanted to maybe go and touch on. And I do have some questions that have been sent in to me, so we will get to those as well, hopefully. But some of you guys made a comment about, those that are seeking community in the house church setting. And maybe this is just because this is something that's fresh in my mind because I just had similar conversations with people recently. But could you talk a little bit about the goal of the house church? Is the goal of the house church community? Is the goal of the house church, just getting to know a whole lot of people? Is the goal of the house church for everybody to have their turn to talk? That kind of a thing? Is it just a holy huddle? Is it like a therapy session for people? How you feeling, how you doing, sort of a thing? Or what would you guys say is the real true purpose of gathering together in this organic fashion? And let's go down the same list. John, how would you respond to that?
Well, I like what Neil said about. I think he said a family, how'd you say it, Neil? A family with a mission or something like that?
A spiritual family on mission together?
Yeah. And so in other words, I think it's community is being developed, which would be deepening relationships with one another and that kind of thing. But then also spilling over and out into among those who are outside the faith and those who are needy and hurting, and so that we're not just satisfied with meetings separately in a living room, but we're also concerned about what's going on around us. So in other words, I think you have to, I guess the way I put it a number of times would be like in the book of Acts, you could look at it in terms of an inward spiral where there's a building up of the body, and then there's an outward spiral that's reaching out beyond the gatherings of the saints. So I think, to me, the healthiest groups I've seen would have both spirals, at work by the Spirit, and that to me would be a, sort of a balance, of things. And obviously there are seasons. Some groups might go through a season of where they're getting to know each other before they, you might say, begin to reach out a bit, and then other groups may spend more time reaching out because of the nature of their and circumstances. But in any event, I think if you just have one spiral, whichever one it may be, I think you're going to be, out of kilter.
Yeah, I agree. So, Neil, what do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Well, the most important thing that we teach is that if church is a living thing with an organism, then it has a DNA, and that DNA is the divine truth, the presence of Christ in our midst, nurturing relationships, the family, the one another that we all are part of, and then apostolic mission, where we are sent ones, just as Christ was sent, so are we, and so we have a mission. And I think that it almost sounds wrong to make that a goal. It's more of a who we are to be,
right?
And everything flows out of that. So rather than making it a mission statement, I think we ought to just make it defining who we are. That DNA is in the core of every cell of the body, and then the whole body is healthy. So it's more natural flowing inward or flowing outward from the inside rather than a setting of a curriculum or an agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Herb, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, it sounds initially like a very generic statement, but this phrase means more to me today than it did 5 years ago, and I'm sure 5, 10, 15 years from now it's going to continue to develop. But it seems to me the early church as a mission held very sacred the call to becoming and putting on display what the world changed by Jesus looks like. And you have to discover what that even means. But to, as a community of human beings, becoming what Martin Luther King would call the new community, or what Gandhi and some of the others would call a new humanity, to zero that back in the Sermon on the Mount and let that flesh its way out in how we're doing life together as a community. Even if it's only 6 or 7 people that are doing life together, you're putting on display what the new world looks like that Jesus came to inaugurate. And that's so many faceted. It's hard to really to say it's this one thing or this one thing or this one thing. Whatever the new world that Jesus came to establish and to heal, whatever that looks like, we're called to become that through the empowering of the Spirit. We're called to become that as a community, and then not in an imposed or artificial way, but just through the intrinsic nature of being that, to put on display to others what the new humanity looks like. And that's, if a small group can tap into that, I liked what Jon said, his statement that the healthiest groups that he's met, I'm a newcomer to a lot of this, but the one group that's at the top of my list in seeing this is a group that doesn't just focus on one thing. They're focusing on becoming that community that Jesus came to create. And so that's really the purpose. It's an outlet where you can't do it alone. There no, you can't love one another without another to love. And this is a community of people that are trying to experience really what a world changed by the Sermon on the Mount looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
That's
agree.
more than just a worship service. It's more than just an event. I mean, this is a community.
Right, and I absolutely, and I think there's even going back to what Dom said earlier about there's nothing magic about meeting in a house, and that idea that you can meet in a house and technically have a house church, but what you're doing is having a meeting about Jesus, but you're not really having a meeting with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it's possible to have your focus and your group be many good things. The focus of your could be edifying one another, encouragement, could be let's all affirm one another around the circle, and those are great to do. I'm not saying those are bad things, or the focus could be evangelism, or again, many, many great things, outreach to the community, et cetera. And I've seen groups that are centered around one particular specific mission or calling or preference. But that's not the same as what I hear you guys talking about. I know we're talking more about that the emphasis is not on what we know or even what we're doing. It's more on who Jesus is and who we are because of him. Do you guys agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to wrap my own phrasing around what we're talking about and what I think we're experiencing.
I agree. As long as we don't limit that to individualism once again. Yes to everything you said, as a group, as a community.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's what you mean.
That is what I mean. Yeah, I don't mean that in the individualistic sense of this is what I am doing, because there is no church without the one another's. Like you said, if there's not another for me to love, if there's not another for me to participate in. And then the other, because that's the reciprocity, the reciprocal nature of the organic church, which is what I love, is that idea of, we are learning together. I heard a friend of mine express it this way. We're learning how to love God and love others, but we're also learning how to let God love us and let others love us.
That's right. I love what you just said too, Keith. Since you're tagging on my comment, let me respond to it.
Sure.
This idea of, in the beginning, a lot of our groups we were trying to practice open mutual participation, and it just felt so artificial. It was like a technique that we were trying to do to try to recapture some magic. And instead, what we found worked better is to really allow Jesus to change our hearts towards one another. And then all of a sudden, we started respecting one another in the room, and we started giving others opportunity and asking for other people's, take on this or that. And it was still open, mutual participation, but it was from a holy, where you considered the sacredness of all the other people in the room, and you really wanted to hear from them. And it was beautiful the way it came out more intrinsically, rather than this is what organic church is, and this is what it looks like, and this is what we're going to try to do. No, learn what the one another's are, and it's almost like open mutual sharing is just a byproduct of that.
Yeah,
it just happens.
Yeah, the emphasis is on the loving one another's part of it, and then the rest of that close out on it. Hey, Kent, I want to make sure I give you a chance to respond to this too.
I think my first thought when you say what's the goal, I want to kind of shout out the Sunday school answer, God, Jesus, Bible, and what I mean by that is you hear that as little kids shouting those things out for responses, but there's a reality there that we want to emulate Christ. That's what any follower of Christ should be attempting to do that, whether you're in a traditional church structure, in a home church, or or in a prison cell, wherever you might be, that should be our goal. That should be what we are attempting to do. And then, how do we do that? How do we do that in a practical way, and what does that look like, and how does it live itself out in our workplace, in our when we're on vacation, wherever we may go? How do we become that representative of Christ? And whether that's in the home church or in the office, at any given moment, it's not. That was one of the huge eye-opening things for me about a decade ago. Was realizing that this is a life. This is not a Sunday. This is something that we are about. And so, we really trying to become more mission-minded as opposed to, living life as a churchgoer would have lived, which I did for years and years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly right, Ken. And that's one of those traps. It's just human nature. It's just easy for us to fall into the liturgy and the pattern, and then it's, in our case, when we first started the group, we've been going, I guess, about 8 years, and, in the beginning days, it was all new and beautiful and organic and sweet, and, it was so exciting that, the church could be anything, and we could, we're always the church, no matter where we are, and we could meet any time or any day, for any reason, just to get together as brothers and sisters and fellowship and worship and experience Christ together. But it seems like slowly over time, you have to constantly fight, at least I do, our group has to, you have to constantly fight against this sort of you slip automatically into this, let's see you on Sunday, do this thing the next Tuesday night for prayer meeting, and you get back into a liturgy, and you have to, at least I think you have to consciously, intentionally fight that thing becoming just another meeting.
Right.
Right. So, kind of continuing on that same thought, as you guys all have been touching on the meeting and what it should be focused on and what it should be about. I guess a couple things. Maybe I'll just throw them both out and we'll just kind of bat them both around for a bit, because one question I had was sort of, well, what are the things that make it difficult, or what are the things that kind of get in the way of realizing that ideal of when we come together and who we are and what Christ is doing in the midst. So I would say first question would be, what are the things that hinder that we need to be careful of? And then sort of the idea of how do I, quote unquote, lead one of these, or how do I facilitate something like this so that I avoid those problems and I avoid going through the motion kind of thing. So, John, do you mind starting us off with that?
Sure. Well, fundamentally, I think you sort of mentioned the idea of the struggle the group went through as time went on, and I think that's one of the major struggles that any group will have is is Christ what it's all about? In other words, is it Him in us? And He promised us that out of our innermost being would flow rivers of living water. And it seems like the biggest struggle groups have is keeping that water flowing and not trying to manufacture it or make it happen, but for it to come naturally out of each person as they participate in the body. And so there are many obstacles to that flowing water, and we don't have time to go into all that, but I think that if we keep in front of our hearts that He promised us these rivers of living water, and if we're seeing a trickle, it's not wrong for us to ask, well, is there something that's hindering the flow, and why isn't He coming out expressing Himself as perhaps we think He should be, or there's no reason to think He shouldn't be? He didn't promise a trickle; He promised a river of living water. So anyway, I think any group is going to face struggles along that line. You might have like a dominant person that's sort of taking over the meeting, or you could have people that are very wounded and they can't hardly say anything. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, but I think that if we are constantly looking at the Lord Jesus as our source of life, that's really what we're after, and then we want that life, as I said earlier, to spiral outward too. But it has to start with the inward spiral in the body, and that's really what my observation would be is that the Lord Jesus isn't really flowing in a group, and there can be many reasons why, but I think we need to. That's one of the most fundamental things we need to look at.
Yeah. Neil, what do you think?
Well, again, I agree with what John's saying. It's that connection with Christ that makes all the difference. I think that the meeting is not the place to find that. The meeting is the place to express that. But you're not going to find any meeting that creates that. So if you don't have that as a disciple, you won't bring it to the meeting.
Right.
Church is really only as good as her disciples. So if they're connecting with Christ and walking with Him at work and at home and in the neighborhood and ultimately to the nations, then I think that the meeting will be vibrant and alive. And I don't think you can produce that kind of disciple, with a 2-hour meeting on Sunday and another 2-hour meeting on Wednesday night.
Right.
Jesus didn't say, I came that they might have meetings and have them more abundantly. It's really more about this strong connection with Christ in the axis of life that is important. And when you have that, and that's spreading among the disciples, meetings will be glorious. And in a sense, that can be a trap, because then we think, let's build a tabernacle, one here for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, and we'll just stay in these meetings. And that's kind of how every really good church got started, with a real holy meeting that turned out to, what they did is they institutionalized the meeting part, missing out on what the real power was.
Yeah. Well, Neil, that is gold right there. I think that is such a key point that you made right there. And I wrote it down, and I'll be blogging about it later this week.
Thanks, Keith.
But, no, that's so great, because it's so true that the meeting is not where you're going to find it. And I think thank you for saying that, because I think that's one of those misconceptions of, again, where people think the house church is going to fix me, the house church is going to provide for me this experience that I've been lacking with, some spiritual truth or enlightenment or something. And then when they get there and they're the same person, nothing has really changed. And like you said, it's got to begin with them and their individual walk with Christ. How are they walking with Him? Are they walking with Him? Are they growing? Are they listening to Him? Are they spending time with Him? And then if everyone in the group is doing that, then when those things come together, then you'll discover, you'll uncover and realize that life that's been happening when they're not in the meeting.
Absolutely. We love because He first loved us. And if we skip that "He first loved us" part, there isn't going to be much love in your meeting. It really boils down to my connection with Jesus right here, right now, walking through the dirt of life. And if it's not vibrant there, there's not going to be any vibrancy in your meeting.
Yeah. Amen. That is huge. Herb, do you have anything? How would you respond to that?
Right. Well, I too want to just amen 1,000 times what Neil just said. The biggest thing the biggest detriment or obstacle that we've encountered is each one of us brings to this experience, this community, whatever it is we feel called to do together. We all bring to it that baggage. It's a strange mixture of beautiful ways of seeing God and very ugly ways of seeing God. Beautiful ways of seeing ourselves and very ugly ways of seeing ourselves, and beautiful ways of looking at everyone else around us, as well as very ugly ways of looking at them. And you bring this baggage, this dysfunction to the group with you, and that's been the biggest obstacle we've experienced. Is this baggage is very real. You can't avoid it. You can't push it aside. It's just got to be brought out and dealt with, and not in a clinical way, but in an honest way, where we're just saying, listen, this is where I'm at, and this is what I'm processing, and we're all on a journey, and to be patient with one another as we allow Jesus to come in and to bring healing, not just individually, but to bring healing to us as a community, where we're learning to love God alongside of, through one another, and to experience that. And you asked, the second part of the question is how to avoid it. Honestly, I don't think there's any way to avoid that. That's part of the beauty of this process. It's where the rubber meets the road, and really learning to allow Christ's kingdom to change us relationally. I don't think Jesus' primary concern is to get everybody in every group theologically on the same page all the time. But we do learn how to relate to one another in a very beautiful, loving way, and that doesn't happen overnight. And there are huge obstacles that are unique to each group, depending upon what the people in that group are bringing to that gathering or to that community. And instead of avoiding it, welcome it, embrace it, be honest about it, and be patient with it, trusting that Jesus' grace is still present there, and we're going to work through this. And I can think of a moment a couple years ago where we just, in one of the groups, had a meltdown, and none of us knew what to do with this guy that was having a meltdown. None of us knew what to do. I mean, we weren't trained for this. We didn't know what we were, it just was happening. And I said, hey, let's just stop and let's pray. And instead of trying to fix it or to avoid it or to repair or freak out, we just spent the rest of the time just praying and coming around this gentleman, and the healing that took place in that moment by not avoiding it, but actually leaning into it rather than away from it. And there's just something beautiful about that. So the greatest obstacle is the dysfunction. None of us do the one another's naturally, and we bring to the table obstacles to that, and to lean into those obstacles, giving Jesus permission to, as a group, as a community, to bring healing to those. Don't avoid it. Lean into it.
Yes. Awesome. Kent, what do you have to add to that?
One of the things that I think can hinder and did seem to hinder our group in the early days was kind of the old ways of doing things. Everyone that was in our group in the early days came out of a traditional church structure, and they seemed to want to implement. That was the model that we knew. That's how you did it. There was a way to go about this gathering and this being together, and people kind of held on to that, I think, a little too tight, instead of just embracing this something new, this adventure, this thing that we don't know what it's really going to look like or how it's going to shape. And we kind of had, for a while, just kind of two different factions within the group of those that wanted kind of more control and more kind of traditional elements, and another side that was a little more carefree and a little more willing to just roll with it. And but I think that you know, there's room to express and to grow and to breathe and to be in these home church settings that can look very different from the home church down the block. And I think that that's okay, because it's how is God meeting you and how are you emulating Christ in the process. And that looks different. You know, in my travels, as I've done filming around the globe, I get exposed to different churches and different what the church looks like in different parts of the world, and it's beautiful in different places, and that can be good, you know. So I don't think it needs to look like one certain thing, but instead, you know, prayerfully seek how God wants to use you in that small group setting, and then press on.
Yeah. Before we move on to another question, does anybody want to add something else to this conversation, to this thread?
Yeah, just that your obstacles are going to look very different if you're coming from, like what was just mentioned. Kent, is that
yes.
What your name is? Kent, nice to meet you. My name's Herb. Your obstacles are going to be very different if you're working with a group that comes from a traditional background, or a group that's never been to any type of church before in their life. And just be aware of that.
And sometimes you'll get those two different types of people in the same group. And,
yeah, exactly.
So, you know, there may be some issues there that need to be addressed or worked through, but...
yeah, well said.
Yeah. And Neil, I think you've made some comments when you and I have talked, and I think even in your book Organic Church about that specific issue, about how really it's a lot easier to start from scratch with a brand new believer, disciple of Jesus, who doesn't come with all the denominational baggage and all the, well, this is the way I've always done it. When you start with a blank slate, it's a lot easier to work with it.
Yeah. Well, one of the running jokes when I first started out was it's easier to give birth than it is to raise the dead. Starting from scratch is in many ways a lot easier. But one of the primary ways is if we see Christianity as movemental, that is spreading from life to life, person to person, people group to people group. When you start with a lot of people who are already Christians, they no longer have oikos connections with the world. And so the gospel doesn't naturally spread from life to life. They have to force it, and it's uncomfortable and hard. And
Amen.
So when you start that way, you're starting off with a handicap as far as seeing rapidly spreading movements go. When you start when you do like Jesus said, go in pairs, and you go to people that don't have Christ, and you start with a person of peace, then all those oikos connections are fresh and alive. And when someone comes to Christ and their life has changed, all their friends and family notice that. And it becomes a contagion that spreads like a virus, like an epidemic. But when you start with a bunch of Christians who've been saved for a long, long time, you have to manufacture all that, and it doesn't happen very easily. So that's a real serious thing we should look at as missiologists.
Yeah.
You know, Keith, that was worth me chiming in right there. That was worth hearing that paragraph was worth my time participating in that right here. That was gold, pure gold.
That was.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, does anyone want to elaborate on that, what Neil just said?
I would like to just add to it, Keith, that doesn't mean we should just abandon those who are in Christ and say they should just go to church on Sunday. And so that's the tension we've always lived with in our movement is, do we say no to Christians, or do we let them come in and enjoy one another's in connection with Christ and a kind of church experience that they've only dreamed about? Well, of course we're going to say yes to that. But it does slow down the movemental element of things.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think, our group is, we're 90% people that have been all kinds of denominations and been in leadership in different churches.
I can't see it.
And but it makes a difference when you have someone who comes to Christ and then joins the group, and it's beautiful because it actually suddenly the whole group shifts energy and focus and direction because you have this person, and for them everything is brand new, everything is totally exciting, everything they learn is just the most amazing thing, and it actually breathes new life into a group that's a bunch of guys that are kind of dusty and old, and I've heard that a million times. It's infectious. You get excited about, wow, look how much joy they have with something that I've just taken for granted for so long.
Right. It can be that way. It can also go the other way, where they're intimidated by the mature Christians, and they're quiet, and before long they look just like the others.
Yes. Right.
Hopefully you don't let that happen.
No, you want to fight against that. Well, what helped us on that end, I think, was that everybody in our group was so genuinely, we all were really so excited. Everyone willingly shifted everything we were doing for the benefit of that new believer, because we wanted to see that person's joy continue, because we were excited about it too, and it was kind of breathing new life into our walk with Christ, and so it was like, hey, drop anything else we were planning to do or talk about or focus on. Let's just love this brother and help him, get closer to Jesus.
Yeah, Keith, and I agree. Early on, when we were first starting Awakening Chapels in the urban center of Long Beach, with some very marginalized people, I wanted to keep it a secret because I didn't want a lot of Christians to come and start influencing it. But then after a short time, they started coming anyway, and I just decided, well, let me see what happens. And I actually found that the power of these changed lives and the gospel that they bought into was so powerful for them that there was no way they were going to be deterred from them. In fact, they kind of had the opposite effect. They spurred life into others. And that was encouraging to see. I do believe that the changed life that comes from the gospel is more powerful than our churchianity culture, but it's just something to be aware of. Let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's good. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I make an observation that is pretty obvious, but I don't think too many people reflect on it, and I think that the history of things in our country, specifically, you've got with the growth of fundamentalism in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you ended up, of course, as somebody already alluded to, that believers were pretty much insulated from having any contact with unbelievers, and so we pretty much had ghettoized ourselves, and the idea of reaching out to hurting people or people that had questionable lifestyles and all that, is basically the fundamentalist mentality was you don't touch the unclean thing, and so you basically ended up with people who were very very isolated, and so I think that shell has been broken certainly, but I think there's a lot of grave clothes, still hanging on to many believers, because they're just afraid of having contact with unbelievers, and I think our evangelical culture tends to feed that in certain ways. So that's just something we need to be aware of too, is in this whole mix.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've kind of bought into this idea that that spirituality comes from the outside in, that it's conforming our lives to behavior patterns, and if we rub shoulders with non-Christians, it's going to affect us. And that's another gospel. That's not the true gospel. The true gospel is quite the opposite.
Right.
And I really think that it's a handicap that has it has devastated churches in the West, not just in their own spiritual life and their faith and practice, but also in our witness to the world. We really have to get back to this idea that change comes from the inside out. And we're very pharisaical about it. We set up fences to keep ourselves holy. One of them that really I laugh at is the idea that a pastor cannot be alone with a female that's not his wife. And they set up rules like that. And I'm thinking, really? I mean, if you can't be 20 minutes with someone of the opposite sex and not fall victim to immorality, then you really shouldn't be a pastor.
Right.
You probably ought to look for something else to do. But we have this belief that the world out there is more powerful than the life inside, and that's just devastating us.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think we act as if Christians act as if those that are lost and quote unquote sinners have something that we could catch, and so we need to stay away from them when we catch what they have. But the gospel is that we've got something that they need to catch, and we need to be connected with them or getting close to them and in relationship with them so that they can catch the gospel. And that's the only way they're going to. We're not in relationship with them.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Very true. Yeah, I had a similar thing happen. I'll try and do the Reader's Digest version of the testimony, but we also are doing like a motel church. This motel that we do ministry at, and every Sunday morning there's a church that meets there at the motel, and it's very centered around. We just read the scriptures together. We're going through the Gospel of Luke right now. Read a section of it out loud together and just discuss it together, and it's very discussion oriented. And there was a guy that started coming that was started off really, he was actually kind of picking a fight with this like 80-year-old guy in a wheelchair. So he didn't start off on a good foot. And one of the guys grabbed the guy, and just pulled him aside and said, "Hey man, until you get straightened up, you're not welcome to come back here anymore." And I told the guy, he told me later that he said that, and I said, "Man, you can't tell him that. What he needs is right here. What he needs that's going to help him straighten up is Jesus. And if you tell him he can't come here to hear about Jesus, how is he ever going to get straightened up?" And the long story short is eventually the guy did continue coming back, and the Lord totally transformed him. I mean, out of the clear blue, he just stood up with tears in his eyes and gave a testimony and confessed everything and just preached us some beautiful, heartfelt message of how Jesus had touched him and changed him. And it was like, wow, look at that. Look what happens when you allow people that are broken and screwed up access to the gospel, and let the Holy Spirit do his work. I mean, he does it.
Amen.
Yeah, awesome. So along those lines, someone had sent in a question, and we've sort of been touching on it a little bit here and there, but the question that was sent in was, how do you keep the group that you're a part of from becoming so inwardly focused that they don't have any outward focus? And I think that would probably be evangelism / serving in the community or recognizing needs of the people in the community. So any thoughts along those lines? John, I'll let you start us off.
Well, again, I would feel that again we have to keep that in all of everything in the context of the rivers of living water flowing out of his people, and all of us are led to different places where that water will flow. And so again, I wouldn't make a bifurcation between what happens in a gathering and then what happens outside, but it's the same water flowing, but among the saints and then outside. So to me, that's the key: is how is the DNA flowing out of us in the life of Christ, and that's what if we're as Neil said, if we're in touch with that and who we are in Him and walking with Him, then I think a lot of these other issues of what we call ministry and niches of ministry and all that sort of fill themselves out naturally if we're just listening to Christ and letting His life flow through us. And I think ministry to others will be an outcome, of that. And I think it is can be a danger when we when we sort of lose sight of the life and we start looking to a program or a way, a method of doing something. And I think we always need to keep it in the setting of Jesus' life flowing out of us, and I think that'll always keep things in perspective.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, John, and thank you for keying in on that, because I think that you, and I'm sure you see this, and a lot of you guys on the call, you probably get these kinds of questions all the time. What do you do with the kids, and what do you do about, the tithing, and what do you do about, there's all these questions, and I understand where they come from, but in essence, what they're asking is, give me a formula to follow, give me a program to follow, instead of, Ross Rohde had the best answer to that question I've ever heard when someone asked him, what do you do about the kids? And he said, ask Jesus. And then the person laughed, but he, with a straight face, said, I'm absolutely serious. Your group should come together as a body and say, Jesus, what do we do about anything? Whatever the question is, ask Jesus. And if you think you can't ask him, then that's really your biggest problem, not what to do with the kids.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Neil, what would you add on to that?
Well, I kind of have this reputation of being a church planter, disciple maker with accountability groups, so it's going to sound weird, but I don't think guilt or shame-based evangelism is really that valuable. I really think that that has to flow out of a love relationship with Jesus. So when I say we're on his mission, it really is his mission, and his mission didn't start in Acts. It didn't even start in the Gospels. It started in the garden when he went looking for Adam, and he's been on mission seeking those who are lost ever since. And all we want to do is just take him by the hand and join him in his mission by following his lead, listening to his voice. And I think that that's the kind of, if you want to use the term outreach, that's the kind of outreach that really is effective and fruitful. It bears fruit because it's born on love. And it doesn't only just bear fruit here, but when you stand before Christ, it's the kind of fruit that will withstand the judgment that you'll go under. It's the kind of eternal life stuff. So while I believe in apostolic mission wholly and giving my life to it, it really does flow out of, like John said, that living water that rises up from within. Now, you can do things. You can do things like you, Keith. I love the way you go to the apartment, and I think this is in Santa Ana. And
yeah, it's a motel in Santa Ana,
Yeah, the motel, not apartments. Well, the motel functions like apartments. You go there and you throw yourself into a place where you can hear Jesus' voice and feel his compassion for people, and things happen. When you insulate your lives in a very safe and very comfortable place, then I think that that's a problem. But it really should be guilt or shame-based evangelism.
Yeah. Yeah. So Herb, how would you answer this question?
Well, I want to jump right in on what Neil said, with especially that word that he just used of insulation, to insulate yourself. There's a lot of groups that once they reach that utopian level of comfort, whether it's really healthy or not, they're comfortable, and they begin to insulate. It's now a family in a very wrong sense of the word, the sense that it's we're a family, we don't want newcomers. We have a group in the Midwest that was fortunate enough to see this happening, this inward focus happening, and they did exactly. And I actually got this from you, Keith. They said, well, what do we do? And I said, get on your knees and ask Jesus what he wants you to do. And this is what they came back with. They decided that they were going to follow the 2x2 principle, and that rather than as a group go out and try to be outward focused, they were still going to keep meeting in their, the comfortable, whatever gathering way that they were doing, but 2x2, and this kind of rubber meets the road, a how-to. Two of them went and joined a local Rotary. Two of them went and hooked up with a church in town that had a community gardening type of ministry. Two of them went out and got involved actually with an LGBT support group for families, and they just went out 2 by 2, just 2 people at a time together, went out and got involved in other groups. Rather than just being involved in we call them heart groups, but just being involved in their group, their house church, 2 by 2, they went out, and what they did was it was very intrinsic. It was very non-artificial. They just innately began to create relationships with the other people in those other meetings. They bumped into more people with other needs, and they could come back and bring those stories to their little group. And within a matter of weeks, this group was there was kind of from the inside out, as we've said so many times tonight, this kind of passion that was born inside of them to, hey, these guys know these people over here in this group, and they need some. And this little house church started to get quite the reputation of being involved and not isolated, but willing to integrate and cooperate and to kind of roll up their sleeves and rub shoulders with other people in the community. And it was a very beautiful thing. So I don't know if that would work for every group, but in answer to the question that was sent in, that's what one group did, and it worked really beautifully for them, is to not just focus on your house church, but to get involved with other groups in your area that are meeting, become members of those groups so you can find out, what's exactly going on around you. It worked beautifully for that group.
Yeah. Well, that is great.
But again, that stemmed from them getting on their knees and saying, Lord, what do you want us to do? How do we fix this?
Right.
That was his unique solution for them.
Right. And let me just say, in my own personal testimony, my own personal life, I've done it both ways. I've done things where, hey, I got a great idea. Here's what I'm going to do, and I just ask God to bless it. And then I also have had things where I've been in prayer, and God has said, Keith, I want you to do this, and I've said, are you sure? And of the two, the things that have the most fruit and have the most life in them are the ones where Jesus has said to me, I've listened to what he said, and I've done what he said, versus, hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to just run off and do this thing, and hey, God, would you bless it? And so just in general, I think it's good advice to a group. It's good advice you give to a person. It was advice you would give to a group as well, that, whenever possible, seek the Lord and do what he's, like Bono says, do what God is already blessing rather than asking him to bless what you want to do. So, yeah. Hey, Kent, so how would you respond to that?
Well, it's a tricky thing, but I think it's a really simple thing. We tend to try to complicate it. How do we not be inwardly focused? It is a question that a lot of us have heard and have wrestled with, and I try to say, what are you tripping over? What are you tripping over? What's in your path? Where you go? Let me back up a little bit. When I was a kid and growing up, it's like, for me, in the church that I was in, missions happened a long way away. It was like on the other side of the globe. These missionaries with strange outfits and bad slideshows would show up at our church, and they'd click through a bunch of pictures, and they'd tell us about some tribal people. And to me, that's what I thought mission was. And it took a long time until, through Bible college and through years as a deacon, until I really started to realize, wait a minute, mission is like on my doorstep. And so for me, what am I tripping over? What do you when you leave that small group? If you're concerned about being insular, when you leave that group, what do you trip over? What's in your path? What is God putting there? Because it's there for a reason. And so what I realize is that mission is wherever we go and whatever we do. And early on, I'm fortunate that I own a film and video production company, and so I'm kind of, I'm like the boss, and I can do things a little differently than some places, some employees might be allowed to do. But in my mind, not verbally, but in my mind, a decade ago, I said, okay, this is going to be, this company is going to be a miniature church, and it's going to be a miniature mission field. And so what I mean by that is there's people that work for me that are followers of Christ. And there's people that work for me, and interns and different people and clients, and some are and some aren't. Some aren't, and some live for themselves. And so that's where I get at that. Okay, I have a chance to encourage this person. I know their story. I know this person is struggling with this, or they're trying to follow Christ this way. And how do I encourage them? How do I nudge them? For many people, believer or non-believer, it's the same thing. Point. All I do is try to point. Look over there. There's Christ. Let's try to live like Him. Am I living for myself, or am I living? Am I modeling Christ and how we do it? And so that's kind of, it's so simple because it's right in front of you. We trip over it.
Yeah. I totally agree with that, Kent. The thing that I totally agree, man, everything you just said. The whole idea that to be a missionary you have to go to another country, but what I've discovered, like at the motel, what I've discovered is you want to find people who are living in poverty, who have never heard the gospel and never experienced the truth that Jesus loves them in a tangible way. You can get in your car and drive 5 minutes and find them. They are in your city. They are in your town. They are in your community. And like you said, you're tripping over them probably. And what probably you should do is just pray and say, Lord, open my eyes. Show me people that are here, the need that is I'm surrounded by. What's my mission field? That's our whole thing. We called our house the mission, and the reason we called our house church the mission was that we wanted to remind ourselves that we're missionaries, and our mission field is where I live and where I work, and my neighbors who live on either side of me, and people my kids go to school with, etc. I mean, God has not accidentally put me where I am. He's done it on purpose, intentionally, and just having eyes open. Be aware of that.
One of the challenges is that, as a group, how do you do mission together? And that's one of the things we've struggled with, because it's like, wait a minute, you're going one place, I'm going someplace else. I've really taken on this mindset of wherever I go, whatever I do, I need to be mindful of, is someone hurting? Is someone in need? What can I do? What can I do? In what little way? In what little way can I help? Whether it's the girl at the checkout counter, or whether it's a client of mine, or an employee, or somebody I bump into on the street. But the rest of the group, other people that we've journeyed with at different times, they're not necessarily a part of that. They're not seeing it. And I encourage them, you have your own, you're tripping over the things God's put in your path. God's given you a skill set that I don't have. He's going to use you to reach people that I can't reach. And if we go out and we try to force something together, which we, not that we're opposed to doing things together, but if we try to force something together, it may not work. We may bungle it up in the process. Whereas it's so natural when it's right in front of you and it's delivered to your doorstep.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's true. All right, well, guys, we have gone a little over time, but can I ask you guys one last, hopefully very quick question, and then we'll wrap it up. I wanted to ask you guys, what is the best piece of advice anyone ever gave you when it comes to practicing this whole idea of organic church? And John, we'll start with you again.
I missed a few of your words. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. What's the best piece of advice you ever heard or anyone ever gave you regarding house church?
Well, I would have to say it was what's already been mentioned in some other ways, is just the idea of listening to the Lord and not, because again, all of us have been used to, like you said, Keith, I've got an idea, let's do it, and God bless it. But just the idea of waiting on Christ and listening to Him and following Him, I mean, that to me is, that's helped me more than I can think of anything else. Is just to listen to Him, and I feel that's the best advice I've ever encountered, and it's saved me from many fleshly pathways and things, and just listening to Him will keep you in the Spirit, of course, and that's what we're after.
Amen. Neil?
Well, I'm going to go more to maybe the beginning of a church, starting a church. I remember I was at Urbana conference once. Billy Graham was there. someone asked him, if you were going to start a church, what would you do first? And this advice I took to heart, and this is how we've done it. He said, I would not start a church. I would just walk the streets and pray for a long, long time. And I would look into the eyes of the people, and I would beg God for their souls. And I'd add to that, I would look for where patterns where people live and where they mingle and where they mix, and in a prayerful, listening heart, spend a lot of time just looking at the people and begging God for their hearts. And when Jesus said the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, his solution was to pray and ask God for more workers, to beg him for more workers. And obviously, in context, there was no Bible college or seminary, parachurch organization. The workers for the harvest would come from the harvest. And I think his solution for this is to beg God for people to come to Christ and be workers in their neighborhoods and in their workplaces. And so I really think that's the best advice. Spend a lot of time listening to God and praying for people. And I think the very next verses, those very people who were praying were being sent. And I think when you get on your knees and you beg God for people, it gets into your heart and you can't stand still any longer. You have to go. So I've actually sent people out in the car and said, Lord, tell me where to go, and just start driving without thinking. And then if you hear go left, go left. If you hear go right, go right. But just let the Lord take you to someplace and show you something. Or just go to a crowded mall and sit there and look at the people and ask God what's the condition of their soul, and spend time doing those kinds of things. And I think your heart will be broken and you'll start to get in touch with that mission that Jesus has.
Awesome. Herb?
Yeah, well, the number one piece of advice I ever got about any of this stuff I got from you, Keith, and I've already mentioned it, and John mentions it, and then Neil says it as well, just that listening. Whenever you bump into a problem, get on your knees and ask Jesus have the group ask, come under the headship of Jesus rather than a policy or a manual or a how-to. But since that's already been mentioned, the second best piece of advice that I've ever been given, and maybe it should be first, is trust the power of love. That when you're sitting in a room across from others, as they're sharing and as you're sharing and as you're all listening, there is something inside of a Christian's DNA where we want to fix people. And I don't mean heal them, I mean fix them. We see something wrong, something that we think is wrong because it's not like us, and we want to try to fix everyone in the room and make them just like us. Avoid that like the plague and trust the power of love. What those people, if there's someone that's out of harmony with you in the room and you feel like you need to do something, the first thing you should think of is, well, that person just needs more love from me. And trust the power of love to bring that group together and to produce in that group, again, what the world changed by Jesus looks like. Trust, that's the biggest, it's the hard, we're so afraid of really believing that love is the most powerful stuff in existence. So trust the power, that's probably the best piece of advice I've ever been given in regards to home church. Whenever you bump up against something, trust the power of love.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Kent, what's yours?
I would keep it real simple and just say, let your light shine. And that's it. Just let your light shine.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been great, guys. I really appreciate the fact that you guys waited for me to show up for my own show, and that you've taken the extra time to share. And I think this is beautiful. I think thank you guys so much. I think the Lord was able to speak some pretty beautiful, amazing truths that I know is going to be an encouragement to a lot of people, and that's what I was hoping for. I knew if I got the four of you guys together on a phone call and just asked a few real simple questions, we would really be enriched and blessed. And I thank you guys for your time. I thank you for your friendship and your fellowship, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thanks for the invitation, Keith.
It was a blessing.
Yes,
good.
thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you,
I just wanted to correct one thing real quick. You misnamed my current film when you introduced me.
I'm sorry,
Stained Glass Rainbows is the name of it. And Rainbows, yes, Stained Glass Rainbows. And it'll be out later this fall, hopefully.
Chance, this is Herb again. I think you're about an hour and a half from me, so we need to hook up on that.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Keith, I told you last time we talked, it's 58-0, not 58 to nothing.
Man, I just keep forgetting that.
Not a big deal, just joking.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was going to say something, too, and I was going to make a joke, but I didn't want to interrupt him. But when Herb said that the best piece of advice, he heard it from me, and then he heard it tonight from John and Neil, I wanted to say, well, now you know where I stole it from. All right. Hey, I love you guys. I'm so sorry. I wish we didn't all live in different places the way we do. And Neil, you're the closest to me in Long Beach, but at least thank God for technology. We can get together and have conversations like this, and hopefully we can set up a time and do it again, and maybe we'll cure world hunger or something like that.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Sounds good.
All right. Bless you guys. Thanks so
much.
I'll talk later.
And you as well.
Right,
thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, guys. Good night, John Boy. And, hey, thank you guys for listening to Subversive Radio Roundtable, our first of hopefully many. Special thanks to Jon Zens, Herb Montgomery, Neil Cole, Kent Williamson. Man, what a beautiful time, and I hope you were as blessed as I was, and hopefully we will do this again soon. God bless, good night, and let the kingdom come.